My name is Michael Albert, and I am the host of the podcast that's titled RevolutionZ. This is our 328th consecutive episode, and our guest this time is Yves Engler. Yves is a Canadian, Montreal-based writer and political activist. In addition to 12 published books, Engler's writings have appeared in alternative press and in mainstream publications such as the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, Ottawa Citizen, and Ecologist. Recently, Yves has encountered the long arm of the law, some call it, for his words. I think he was just in jail for, perhaps 5 days or so, I'm not sure, before gaining release. So, Yves, how about if we start with your current situation? What did you do, and why did you do it? And then, what did they do, and what do you think their reason was?
Well, what I did, I think there's probably lots of things that are in the background to why I got charged, but concretely, what I was accused of initially was harassing this well-known Canadian Zionist influencer who's pretty at the extreme end of the pro-Israel movement. She calls for mass deportation. She's posted stuff from actions by neo-Nazi groups and the like. But basically, I've posted dozens of times. Actually, the Crown said 72 times. I didn't know that in response to her posts on X. I guess more or less over the past year. I wasn't really aware of her. Her name's Dahlia Kurtz. Before a year from now, she used to be a sort of corporate media. She had a radio program, and she's got some sort of corporate media profile. So I basically just responded to her racist pro-genocide posts, and I did it with snark, with biting politics. I never threatened her. I've never met her. I've never messaged her. I don't even follow her on X. I just literally responded to things that appeared in my feed. And so a couple of weeks ago, the Montreal police inspector called me to say they wanted me to come to the station because they were going to charge me the next day for having harassed Dahlia Kurtz. And then I reported on it. I wrote about it, and I promoted a email action alert campaign to the police inspector saying that they shouldn't be, charging me. A few thousand people emailed the police by the next morning, and the police's response was to then say I was harassing the police, and they brought in four new charges of harassing the police for having written about it and sort of said this is ridiculous. What's coming my way? So now I'm basically charged with harassing this Zionist influencer and harassing the Montreal police. The charges haven't. The court hasn't adjudicated the matter whatsoever. I spent 5 days in jail because the police wanted to bring in a condition. They initially told us to my lawyer on the first day around the Dahlia Kurtz, saying that I wouldn't be able to mention her name publicly. In effect, meaning I couldn't actually talk about the case against me. And I was not willing to agree to that condition for my release. And so I basically spent 5 days in jail to get before a judge to deal with the matter of whether this condition was a legitimate condition to impose. And I should say that the judge didn't even hear our defense. Basically, as the Crown laid their case out for why this condition should be imposed on me, it became clear, and I think this is where the room being full with people supporting me and supporting the free speech and the Palestinian cause. The judge understood this had pretty vast free speech implications and had quite significant, Palestine implications, and basically forced the Crown to concede on this condition. And I basically agreed, which I was willing to agree to before going to the police station, that I would not interact with Dahlia Kurtz in any way, i.e., I would not respond to her racist messages on X anymore. And so I just blocked her, which she never did to me. So if she said I was harassing her, she could have just blocked me months and months ago. But she clearly was attempting to do a sort of kind of judicial policing kind of game.
It's quite, I laughed when you were describing the transition from harassing her, which is ridiculous, to harassing the police, which is truly humorous. And yet it's not funny. When all is said and done, our laughing at it, and I include myself in that, is probably not very constructive because it diminishes what is really very, very serious. I don't know about Canada very much. I apologize for that. But certainly in the United States, what's happening is it's not a laughing matter. It's really serious business. And so I wonder, having had, experiencing it is a little different than thinking about it, and uh, gives one a slightly different, I guess, angle on the situation. And I wonder what your take is about in Canada insofar as it arises, and in the United States as it is now very much arising, um, how to respond, how to conduct ourselves in such a way as to not resign, not be despondent, not to even just fight back, but win. Um, so, what do you think? What are you taking away from your experience here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it was a small win for free speech and for Palestine campaigning, the getting the condition. It's a really really small win in in the big picture, but a very small win, and that came because the support at the court was really clear. The judge clearly saw that the room was packed. It was an overflow room, had a second room, and stuff like that. So that having that solidarity inside the court and outside impacted very concretely on that. Now, the broader question I think is a really important one. How do we, the tension between denouncing the repression and a week before being arrested, I participated in a panel with the BC Civil Liberties Association lawyer on the new McCarthyism in Canada, all about the attacks against anti-genocide protests over the past 16 months. And there's just an endless number of examples, and we go in, and obviously what we're seeing in the States with this recent detention of this Columbia student Mahmoud Khalil by Trump, and Trump boasting that he's going to start going after many others. We're seeing a serious escalation of this type of repression. So on one hand, it's obviously essential to denounce the repression, but then if we go too far and let the sort of denunciation, or let the sort of paranoia of the state or the power of the state, that leads to inaction. And that is and how do you denounce it, but then don't lead to sort of not doing what's most important here, which is ending Canadian U.S. complicity in the utter slaughter and destruction of Gaza. I don't think there's any simple answer to it. I think that part of it is to have some perspective on what's actually before us in terms of repression. I mean, I didn't enjoy spending 5 days in jail, but it was mostly just boring. It wasn't traumatizing or anything like that. So to have some sort of sense, it's absolutely inconsequential compared to what Palestinian prisoners are facing by Israel, let alone the slaughter in Gaza. So in a big picture internationalist human perspective, it's very minimal. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. And then it's also about broadening the tent in terms of, I think that there's people who may not be in agreement on the position against Canadian complicity in Zionism or Israel's destruction of Palestinians, but they do have some a greater agreement on the free speech question. So, can you use the repression from Zionist forces as a way to sort of broadening the tent in terms of a pushback? I think there's some evidence that can happen and has happened. I mean, you're seeing some Democratic lawmakers in the U.S. Putting their name to freeing Mahmoud Khalil from ICE detention, and I think that you see that in my case to some extent as well, where there was people PEN Canada put out a statement, and they didn't agree one way or another on the Israel question, but that I have the right to criticize a Zionist influencer on X. So broadening like that. But the main issue is just to not stop, right? The way you win is if you just keep going. And I know it's really difficult to keep going when there's a sense that there's if you look at Justin Trudeau on Thursday, he declared himself, "I am a Zionist," amidst the recent new blockade of food into Gaza, and 16 months of horrors, and now you got the prime minister declaring I am a Zionist. So on one hand, we failed in terms of changing that political ethos in Canada over the past 16 months. But at the same time, we've clearly had a huge success in shifting the terrain. And you look at the NDP, the Social Democratic Opposition Party, they've gone way, way, way better on the question of Palestine over the past 16 months. The number of people who are critical of Zionism or critical of Canada's support for Israel, that's increased substantially. So how do you navigate being a sense of being kind of overwhelmed by there's no quick fix, right? This is Canada's support for Zionism didn't begin 16 months ago. It's more than a century long process, and then it fits in within a broader imperial foreign policy, which is something even broader, which then fits into broader structures of who owns the economy and the racism, white supremacy, all kinds of other broader political and so none of those things are gonna change overnight, but they can change, or they can lessen, or they can weaken by multi-year or multi-decade activism, campaigning, organizing.
It's funny. Not funny again. Here in the U.S. And Canada is probably just a few steps behind on this trajectory. I mean, I don't know, but that's plausible, except, of course, for the recent U.S.-Canada tension, which may work on behalf of slower change in Canada in this right-wing direction. But one of the things that is not commented often about, say, the Trump experience is what they did. So in a very short space of time, relatively speaking, they completely took over the Republican Party, and they're currently restructuring the government, not in a reformist manner. They're literally striking at the roots of institutions. They're doing what we say we want to do, except they're doing it, of course, with a very different end in mind. Sometimes it's hard to perceive the end, but it basically looks like, at a minimum, helping themselves, helping the rich, helping the powerful, and maybe more than that. But the extent to which they accomplish that, and then in parallel, the extent to which Sanders, of course, it has a long history, to which Sanders rose very quickly and was, to a degree, challenging structures, does suggest that maybe things can happen a little more quickly than we sometimes fear, or at least I think so. But I have a different kind of question for you, which is, how do you understand? Well, take Colombia. I can't give an example in Canada, but you can, I'm sure. The president of the university, it's not just that he's not taking a humane stance, they're collaborating. They're literally becoming collaborators, and it's happening all over the place. And it is not evident to me how that is easy to explain. I mean, maybe you can, these people, of course, they're not our allies. The president of Columbia University, et cetera, are not tribunes of the people. They're not seeking socialism and so on and so forth. But you wouldn't have expected them to roll over so quickly as a great many of them are. It's like a profile in cowardice or something. But, or what? In other words, so how do you understand that part of what's happening?
Well, I was actually expelled from Concordia University. I was in the student union back in 2002, so 23 years ago, I was expelled. And that was done by a very liberal leader of the university. He would definitely, I don't know, probably voted for the Liberal Party, and certainly called himself a liberal. And he was willing to go the authoritarian route pretty quickly when protests hit the fan. I have to say, I mean, I think concretely with the universities, I mean, I kind of agree with Finkelstein's thing that it really is the sort of the billionaire Jewish donor, pro-Zionist donor impact on the universities. I think that we've seen this at McGill, and Saini, the head of McGill, he's just been totally repressive. And Sylvan Adams, the biggest donor to McGill, the biggest single donation, basically said it openly in a Canadian Jewish News podcast about sort of the there's a network of pro-Israel, well-off Jewish donors that have been able to have a great impact. So I think that when you look at Canada's support for Israel more broadly, I think it fits into a geopolitical empire. There's a Christian Zionist element. There's obviously a Jewish pro-Israel lobbying element. There's racism elements. But when it comes to concretely at the universities, I think there's a pretty good case to be made that the impact of specifically Jewish donors to pro-Israel donors is a real. There's an age divide. I just wrote something about Concordia. Concordia recently, at the University of Montreal, they voted at a BDS resolution 885 to 58 for due to
Yeah.
resolutions, the students, right? But then immediately the head of the university, like later that day or early the next morning, condemned the vote as this undermining democracy and a danger and all this kind of stuff. So like the opinion among students is just it's closing in on I mean, not unanimous. Probably half students don't really care, but of people who actually pay attention, it's overwhelming. And yet, the sort of donor class is still in this very pro-Zionist. So I think that at the universities, that is sort of front and center. But I think that the broader element is that liberals in positions of power, they obviously, I think, pretty easily go in the direction of repression, and their sort of their belief in free speech and dissent and challenge, it crumbles pretty quickly when they are actually sort of challenged, which is what the challenges are at Columbia and McGill and Concordia. It's asking very concrete things of the university, endowments, or the university's relationship to Israel, exchanges and stuff like that. And they don't want to concede to the popular opinion among certainly among students, and probably even among most faculty.
Yeah, it's I don't know whether you're aware. I mean, it's a parallel track, I suppose, but Trump, Musk cutting the NSF and the NIH in the United States, basically funding for science and funding for health. That's not what the Germans did, right? The fascism in Germany did not say, okay, we don't want any science. They said, we want science beholden to us and creating things that benefit, but they didn't cut it all. And it's striking. There are things going on that are hard to explain, even from the point of view of the perpetrators of what's going on, unless it's just really shock and awe. It's just really batter them until they give in, and then we'll do whatever we really want. You know what I mean? I find myself having a very difficult time answering the question, why did they do this? Why did they do that? Which people ask me. And I say, fuck if I know, you
Well,
know?
in Canada with Trump and the whole tariff stuff, I mean, that's like
It's incredible.
they go
Yeah.
on and on. I mean, all the official commentators go on and on about trying to figure it out. I mean, Trudeau's explanation seems to be the more like sensible one, which is that he's actually trying to like strangle Canada economically to push the annexation. I mean,
To
that
push,
push annexation. I mean, as insane as that sounds at one level, that at least has a certain coherence. But like the one day you announce tariffs, which is effectively hurting General Motors and
yeah,
Chrysler, mega U.S. corporations. You announce tariffs, and a whole series of other mega U.S. corporations that do some operations in Canada, some across the border, and the like. Uh, and then uh, and then the next day you withdraw it, and then you go back, and then fentanyl. I mean, there's more fentanyl that comes from the U.S. into Canada. Like, if you actually like think these questions seriously, Canada has way bigger complaints. All the guns coming in, all the
right.
fentanyl coming in. It just goes on, right? And so people are left with the question. I mean, is it all just that the guy likes attention? I mean, he does like attention. We know that.
I mean, it's so crazy, right? You can come up with explanations like that. I want to be in the spotlight. Um, I'll use the hammer to keep everybody else in line, and I'll be in the spot. I mean, you can come up with all these crazy things. It's it really is hard to fathom. In Canada, in the population, is the population aroused and angry, bystanding? I mean, what is it? What is your sense really of the Canadian citizens' reaction to the fact that the United States is behaving as it is?
Oh, there's aroused. I mean, not aroused in the sense of organized, but aroused in the sense of
Angry.
serious angry. Yes, there's no doubt about
Yeah.
that. All the polls show just like remarkable shifts, I mean, it's obviously reflected, and the media amplifies it. And the poll, this is now more than 2 weeks ago. Basically, 30% of Canadians consider the U.S. an enemy state. So it's equal number of allies as enemy. The word enemy, which is you wouldn't have got that from what has it been, at least since World War II, of Canada being maybe the UK. I mean, Canada, UK being the biggest supporter of U.S. imperialism, all over the world, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've gone on about, if the U.S. invaded Canada, the Canadian military would support that invasion, because the Canadian military is so many different ways it enables every U.S. invasion around the world, and it's completely structured to be an add-on, an appendage of U.S. Global domination, and so it's a pretty remarkable show. I've never seen anything this rapid in terms of political. I think, from somebody who's been working on Canadian foreign policy for a couple of decades now, I've been obviously very ambivalent to Canadian nationalism, because I disagree with this sort of mythology of Canada being benevolent, kind of force. But obviously, an important part of Canadian foreign policy is assisting the U.S. empire, and this is an incredible opportunity to discuss all these different
Yeah.
ways in which our military, our political structure enables that, and to to hopefully break that. I mean, just today I asked the leader of the Bloc Québécois about Canada purchasing 88 F-35 fighter jets from Lockheed Martin, and I was like, well, we're paying 19 million to a U.S. Leading U.S. Military industrial complex company, while there's this trade dispute, while they're trying, Trump is trying to sabotage the Canadian economy. Should we reconsider that? Obviously, Canada buying the F-35s is all about, not about defense. It's about being able to assist the U.S.
Right.
principally in NATO, secondarily in bombing Libya and
Whatever.
or wherever,
Right.
right? And so these things, and he actually answered like, yeah, we are willing to reconsider that. And so these things have just been there's some space that's been opened up, and I think from a progressive standpoint, this is the I mean, I don't want to look at it kind of like in a cynical way, but these are opportunities that we have ideas floating around. Let's get these ideas out there when they might have a bit more traction than they would in other contexts. And that, on the Palestine question too, the Trump being so over the top on the Gaza, he's going to turn it into Riviera and take it over and this kind of stuff. And simultaneously, there's anti-Trump sentiment in Canada. Well, it's try to make the Palestine cause be viewed as a little bit more of a Canadian nationalist cause, even though historically Canadian nationalism is very pro-Zionist, of course. That goes back to the British Empire. But use that to sort of push that Trump's we don't want to be with Trump on the Gaza file, so use some of these opportunities to, you don't want to go too far with nationalism, and right, obviously First Nations and Indigenous people who've been wiped out by Canadian this Canadian state and Canadian nationalism. But yeah, use these sort of things to advance policies or ideas that are important ideas or policies.
You almost have to wonder if, to open the gates to those kinds of discussions is not typically the way ruling elites operate. They try to not provoke that kind of thing. So what's the flip side of it for him? All right, so you're saying that Trudeau says the flip side of it is, since they have to do what we want them to do anyway, and since they have to support us around the world anyway, let's have them be the 51st state. Okay, so that's one possible explanation, I guess. Here's another strange one. look at the extent to which you're describing Trump's behavior unifying the Canadian population around something, in this case, around nationalism and being upset by the United States. Suppose Trump is thinking that if he can provoke Canada and provoke Panama and provoke whoever the fuck into being bellicose toward the United States, he can increase his own support inside the United States nationalistically. In other words, have the same effect inside the United States that he's having in Europe and in Canada, except to his advantage here. Maybe that's his thinking. I don't know, you know? I
Yeah.
really it's I mean that's another sort of weird but plausible way of reading it. Um
Yeah, there was all kinds of people angry when Canadian fans were booing the U.S. team at the recent Four Nations hockey tournament.
yeah.
And
Yeah. That's you can just see the kind of effects. Uh I wonder something else about Canada. In the United States, it's felt to me like people on the left. So now we're talking about people, not the whole population, but people who are seriously leftist, totally aware academically, intellectually of what's been going on. But it hasn't seemed to me clear that more than a fraction have sort of felt it at the level that it should be felt. I don't know how to describe this. In other words, it's an academic phenomenon. Oh, isn't this interesting? Fascism. As compared to, holy shit, this really is on a trajectory that is absolutely horrific. Um, and so I have to do something. And the I have to do something part, from a position of not being really in touch very much, has seemed to me to be almost stronger outside the left than inside the left for some, in some extent. The best of the liberals, so Sanders and AOC, and, a couple others, three or four others, are really pushing. I mean, they don't have quite the views that I would most like, say, but they're fighting and they're exerting themselves. I mean, Sanders is, I don't know where he gets the energy from. I don't know whether it's reported in Canada. He's going from place to place to place, talking to 3,000 or 4,000 people at a time, um, in conservative areas in Trump land. I haven't seen that from the organized left. This spontaneous left is sort of happening. I don't know how to describe this phenomenon. I really don't. And if we bring it down to Canada and those campuses, why aren't they taking buildings? Why isn't Columbia total turmoil right now? I'm not sure what the answer to that is.
Yeah, I'm not really sure either. I mean, the encampments in Canada through the summer, April, May, June, all through the summer actually, they were pretty impressive. I mean, at one level they were impressive, and I actually
Yeah.
happened to travel a bunch, and so I went to Vancouver, Victoria, Nanaimo, Kelowna. Yeah, so like four or five of them I saw. Um, you know, but I think that they and McGill here was the big one in the first one, and it was, I think, so tenuous being able so they were so under attack, being labeled as Hamas supporters or being labeled as anti-Semitic or just kind of under general attack, that just keeping that space was a victory. I mean, at Columbia they did try, right? They did occupy.
Oh, yeah.
They renamed the one building the Hind Hall, I think, or something like that, for 24 hours. But the police came in pretty quickly. I don't know. I don't know enough about what happened in. I guess it was '69, but I think that lasted a few weeks. They were able to occupy the offices for like a couple of weeks. Um, so the sort of police repression seems like, in maybe not in terms of actually how much violence was administered, but in terms of its speed and maybe
Yeah.
agility even was better. The NYPD was better this time, or quicker, or more effective. Um, uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, in Canada, like the Palestine thing's been fascinating. There's never been a foreign policy issue where Canada contributed to imperialism, where there's been a bigger uprising than over the past 16 months. I mean, there's just Montreal here. There's been demonstration every weekend. Now it's down to 150, 200 people, but for 16 months at the high point there was 50,000, and then the main groups divided, and so there was a Saturday demo and a Sunday demo for much of the last 16 months. And so it's continued. I mean, there's been tons of actions, just an endless stream of actions. Student votes, just encampments, hunger strikes, all kinds of different stuff. That's never happened. Maybe in the U.S. you obviously know better. Or, Vietnam, maybe that was went over for a longer period and bigger demos. I don't know for sure, but this is sort of unique in Canadian foreign policy history, but like it didn't really come from the left. It's actually fascinating. Like here, this group, the Council of Canadians. It's been this sort of left nationalist group for the past 35 years. At one point had like 50 chapters across the country. I used to do lots of events, book events at different local chapters and smaller communities with council. From what I can tell, the council had like nothing, basically nothing. They put out like 2 tweets in support of like Palestine over the past like 16 months. So basically nothing to do with helping mobilize. Maybe some local chapters were involved, but it's really come from kind of a sort of somewhat spontaneous and somewhat just sort of Palestine focused. Like it's not even clear to me that there's that much sort of spillover in terms of being critical of Canadian foreign policy. Even all these people who've like been exposed to Canada assisting these horrors in Gaza, they don't even necessarily have broadened it to being anti-imperialist or anti-Canadian foreign policy, or Canadian foreign policy not benevolent. I think some of that's happened, but so there isn't much of an organized radical left at all. That could, in a sense, be as you would say in French, like récupération. They could recuperate. They could benefit from these mobilizations. You don't even really see many groups like they're like selling papers, or like leftist groups selling papers at these demos and stuff, and very kind of like little presence. So yeah, I don't know fully explain that. Is that to do with social media? Is that to do with attention spans being really limited because of social media? Is it because the level of consumerism has reached a point where uh, that's just so much on people's mind? Is it because people are like looking at the really big picture and they're saying, hey, the climate crisis is just, wow, this is coming down, it's getting worse every day, and it's like such a macro issue to deal with. How can we possibly deal with this? Um, I don't know how exactly that plays out in people's consciousness, but I do agree that there's a kind of remarkably little left sort of anti-capitalist or socialist organizing taking place that's fitting into all this reaction.
Yeah, have you heard about what's been going on in Serbia at all?
I saw that there's the protests that partly sponsored or spurred by like a train disaster or something like that, but
A
not.
bridge collapse, yeah. But it's huge, right? It's like, remember Greece, when Greece was exploding not that long ago. It's like that, but it seems like it's even bigger. And it has a remarkable aspect, which is when I was asking somebody who was in the know about it, um, and this came up, this issue of, well, what's the role of people who have a sustained and a history of left activism and left thinking and left views in it? And the answer was nothing. There's no role. This is an entirely different phenomenon. And they described it as partly nationalistic, um, defending Serbia against the government, partly just an expression of a desire for freedom. Some of the stuff that's happening sounds incredible. The students are marching into rural areas. Of course, it's a small, the distance isn't that, but they're marching into rural areas, going through them to get people to understand that you can stand up and fight. And they're literally doing, and they're being housed in the rural areas. So the situation is pretty volatile. But it's quite remarkable that the left is sort of irrelevant, at least as far as what I've heard. Partly because it's been wiped out, and partly because it just doesn't speak the same language. Um, and I don't know whether that's happening or not. Uh, currently in the U.S., there's a little bit of both. There are certainly seasoned activists, committed, putting forth views, um, participating, organizing, etc. But there's also lots and lots of new people, and the new people don't always operate the same way or with the same thoughts in mind as old timers. I don't know. Something like it may be going on in Canada too. A difference that's interesting in what you're describing is a phenomenon that is rooted in Palestine or in pro-Palestinian activism and concern. In the United States now, that still exists, but that's not the dominant factor. The dominant factor is Nazis in the White House. I mean, the dominant factor is that it becomes a subset of what else is going on. Um, I don't know. I'm not sure. I do know. I mean, you're moved to fight. You're moved to act. You're moved to speak, write, whatever. Not everybody is, and I mean among people who understand. Not that it's not that they've been tricked. It's not that they have been lied to so much that they believe lies. They believe the same thing as you and I believe, and they go back to work or to school and just do their thing. That's the thing that has to be somehow overcome, and I don't know how to.
I agree. I mean, I can even, a lot of people that I've been active with on Palestine related stuff and other issues, but active with over the past 20 years, I've been like taken aback. All these people who I know who just haven't come out to the demos, right? There's been
Yeah,
demos every weekend. And I know that they, are appalled by what Canada's supporting in Gaza. Uh, I also know that people have, they have families. I do too. I have two young kids as well. I try to bring them. I try to bring them to the demos. But I do. Is it despondent? Is it that there was the International Women's Day demo on Saturday, and there was a couple thousand people and very heavy kind of anti-imperialist. Obviously, Palestine was very present at it, and for that day you see people that I wouldn't see at the other demos. Is it just a matter of it's just too overwhelming to come out every weekend, or is it
don't
is
know.
it a matter of so we do the one time a year. There's two big ones. Maybe come out to the May Day. You come out to the International Women's Day. Yeah, I don't know how that plays out. I know on a personal level, like I mean, maybe it's a commentary on my indifference to like social life or social stuff, but like I'm feeling a sense of going out it's invigorating. It's if you just watch Al Jazeera reports about the killing in Gaza, and then you just sort of go on with your day. That doesn't register for me in terms of. So yes, it's on one hand, some days it's cold out and marching through the winter in Montreal is not in some ways pleasant, but it actually is. So there's an element of like self-realization by participating in this kind of stuff. I do wonder how some of those questions about how is it a sense that we're not succeeding? Do people just come out
Yeah,
because they sense that we might win, and so that's why if you look at the first 6 weeks of the demos, they kept getting bigger, and it was like
yeah,
50,000 on week 5 or 6, and then I think maybe a lot of people just conclude that. well, we tried, didn't win, couldn't stop the government supporting this, didn't stop Israel, and I'm still appalled by what's going on, but I don't come out. Is it that? That then gets into the questions of like what is a win and how do people conceptualize. Obviously, you want to stop seeing babies killed in Gaza tomorrow, everyone, but that's not all we want to stop, right? We want to stop something much broader in terms of justice for Palestinians, and then, quite frankly, then in terms of Canada and what Canada represents globally, and so how do you process a win versus the short term objective versus the bigger win? Um, I don't know how to fully what goes into that in terms of people's calculations. But I think the pressures in this society towards consumption, towards realizing oneself through I don't know. I would say mostly, watching the Montreal Canadiens and whether the Montreal Canadiens win or don't win, if that's like an important thing. And the thing that really struck me all of that was to see the capacities was the student strike in Quebec in 2012. It was just a remarkable, all this like latent creativity and talent and that came out in a political way, and to see all of that, and there's so many different ideas for what types of demos, what types of actions, what types of art, what types of posters, whatever, right? And so like we have all this, obviously, this ingenuity, this creativity. Most of it gets kind of put towards what is profitable, what leads to buying more things, and even at the level of I saw recently a former activist friend who I haven't seen involved in any protests in many years, but was quite active recently. And what she's doing is like sort of self actualization in writing, and this sort of very, I don't know, kind of progressive, if you want to call it, um, getting in tune with oneself and all these things that I don't, I think is useful, and sort of like meditation, kind of whatever. All that I think is useful in one sense, but it has to be combined with like activity and action and political action, and it's like all the forces of our society push us towards, even if it's not towards full on hyper consumerism, it's towards, I don't know, sort of like self actualization by being more attuned with how I feel when I'm writing, and yeah, it's depoliticized. I mean, to put it simply, and it's how do you overcome that? I don't know, besides trying to do what you can do to build a left um, consciousness, organization, etc.
You mentioned um, you have two young children, and maybe that's a factor in some people's lives. Do you know who Dave Dollinger is?
I don't.
He's the U.S. Gandhi, right? He was a nonviolent activist starting in, I guess, World War II. He was active through all the 60s. He incredibly impressive person, and um, politically very, very, very astute. And I'm driving with him one day, and he was older, and he had kids. And I asked him the question. I said, how do you reconcile going to jail, which he did repeatedly, with your family? And he said, I almost can't talk about this without crying. He said, well, I feel it's my responsibility as a father to show them what a life well lived is. But after that, it's up to them. Uh, I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but it was how he dealt with it. I just thought I would relay it in case. Anyway, um,
Yeah, no, I definitely, I definitely, feel that it's about instilling in your children a sense that there's there's injustice in the world, and I mean, everyone has different capacities to respond to that, or to, but you have an obligation, really, I would say, to to respond to that, and whether it's all the way in terms of going to being sent in jail repeatedly. My son, when who's 7, when uh, so I was lucky to have my partners out of the country when I went to got detained. So my parents are here, so and they're retired, so that's not that difficult. And my when my dad told my son what that I'd been sent to jail, he asked my dad, "Is my dad a bad guy?" Because he's still obviously the good and bad is the police. We've had a number of discussions since then, and seeing that process of Joshua kind of like thinking about these things and looking at it. It's interesting. Also, I took him to taken him to dozens and dozens of demos, and over the past 6-8 months, he's gotten sort of hostile to going to protests, and he's very pro-Palestinian. He's would talk to his friend endlessly about the bad things happening in Gaza, but he's doesn't want to go to demonstrations, and he's sort of his demonstrations are associated with like being dragged somewhere that he doesn't want to go, which is a
Yeah.
tad bit unfortunate, and probably will be the ethos for the next handful of years. But my younger daughter, who's not quite 3, she's obviously happy to go to demonstrations, and you know it's kind of exciting and whatnot. But yeah, that process of figuring those things out, and I think it's difficult for every different person has different obligations when it comes to these. If you don't have grandparents around and you get brought to jail, I mean, I made that argument to the police officer when they were actually asking me to come in later that day on the second day, and I was like, well, I have a 7-year-old who has to be picked up at 3:10 at school, and where is he gonna be tonight? And if you're gonna that kind of stuff, and they actually sort of were willing to push the coming into the next morning at 9:30 a.m. So all those things become part of it, and then how does it deal with your partner and all other dynamics
Yeah.
that are broader? But yeah.
Yeah. Um, I don't know whether you've seen any of the videos of Sanders' talks that he's giving out in, those rural areas, but with huge crowds. But one of the key things he says, and he's very unequivocal about it, almost aggressive about it, um, more or less, I understand feeling frustrated. I understand being afraid. I understand being depressed. Get over it. There's no time for any of that. And it's striking because on the left, what you hear is what you were talking about earlier, a version of what you were talking about earlier, you know, take care of yourself. Take care, it's quite different. I don't know. Uh,
Yeah, well, I mean, I obviously
I mean, of course, you have to take care of yourself,
yeah,
but
yeah. I completely agree with Sanders that what's the point of being? I mean, yeah, it's the climate crisis.
everybody's going to get it soon. I mean, the Colombia leadership, you know, bad leadership, was supine. They were on their knees. They were begging him, and they're still getting blasted. So people are going to not be able to say, well, my tactic is don't
Keep
be overly provocative to protect what we have. That's going to go by the wayside pretty soon, as a rationale, I think. Uh,
Yeah, I would assume so. And but also, I mean, yeah, people need to take care of us. I've understood that. I saw activists when in student days where uh, they did too much. Obviously, support them doing tons of stuff, but it was literally not taking care of yourself in the minimal sense of that. The obviously that's central to being able to engage. Eat healthy, get exercise,
yeah.
simple things. But that's a really small element of whatever, right? And so yeah, you got to do that. But the political has to be front and center, and the getting down. But that, I guess that's some, I get the idea of why engage in something that you don't think will be successful. That idea has some logic to it. Um, but I also think that there's a counter logic to it, or associated logic to that, which is that engagement is I mean
It's
you
not going to convince people, Lars. In other words, if you say to somebody who believes you're going to lose, who believes there is no such thing as winning, who believes there's nothing better, yeah, but become involved because it's enriching, it's fulfilling. It's not going to work. I
no
don't believe it's going to work.
I agree.
Uh,
Yeah, I agree that just isolated like that, certainly. But the idea that there's not better. I mean, the idea there's not better. There's better in the here and now. From the urban planning of Amsterdam compared to Montreal, to the unemployment insurance in France compared to the U.S. I mean, there's endless stream of uh, showing that there are better in the here and now. Macro level, I agree with you that presenting an alternative to capitalism, for instance, is
yeah.
is 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 helpful in terms of engendering action, and engendering mobilization and adherence to the left, and the like. Um, but I think that there is some less bad, at least, alternative. I think that basically everyone uh, agrees that that's the case.
Yeah, but you can feel. I mean, I don't know any of the answers here at all, but you can imagine a person feeling, um, look, I can help my family, I can help my close friends by devoting myself to them. If I devote myself to movement activism, even to thinking about it, much less doing things about it, it's like rolling a rock up a hill. I'm going to get crushed when it comes back down. So I'm going to do the former. I might even cry over it, but I'm going to do the former because I can do that. And the left's response is somehow doesn't realize that this is, as you said earlier, not stupid. It is not ignorant. It's a calculation, and it's a calculation that is not crazy. And that the right answer has to be, or the left's answer has to be, wait a second, you can devote a certain amount of that time and energy over here and have an impact. And here's how. And here's why it can work. And we don't put much effort into that. We just say, in a famous old version from the Weatherman, country sucks, kick ass. That was one of their slogans. This is not going to convince a sober, sensible, thinking person, right? And regrettably, we haven't done a very good job of clarifying how it is that people's time, energy, thought, spirit can make a difference and can win in the short run and then not get rolled back. The population is pretty sophisticated. You like on a campus, you say, "Well, we're going to get rid of such and such a campus's support for arms shipments to Gaza." Well, the sophisticated student is thinking to themselves, "So, what difference is that going to make? Somebody else is going to ship the arms over." Right? If it doesn't come from, if we don't do the research on our campus, well, they're going to do it over there. And that's not crazy. There's some validity to that, and the left doesn't address it well enough. Or to even put it on a whole different plane, the right winger says, "You guys complain about repression. Look at how they've gone after Trump." And we laugh instead of explaining. instead of clarifying, instead of meeting them where they're at and, dealing with what they're saying. Some of that's happening now, I think. I think things are changing. The only question is it going to be fast enough? Um, given where things are headed. Uh, it can be. I don't have any doubt about that. Um, but will it be?
So, what do you see as the emerging resistance to Trump? You think it's this Sanders kind of building a
No, that's the mainstream visible part of it, and even there, it's not that visible in the mainstream. No, I think there are people all over the place now who are scared shitless, and who are angry, and who a subset of them will mobilize. I think it's happening. If I had to guess, I would say that on a good many campuses right now, students are meeting and are preparing for something like what we saw in the encampments or occupations or what have you in this spring. So I think we'll see another. I hope we'll see another round, even larger, probably even more militant and angry. I can't imagine on a campus if your president and the higher ups and a subset of the faculty are literally collaborationist with what you believe to be, because they are, fascist. That has to provoke a great deal of energy and anger. So I'm expecting to see that. Then the question is, what happens in labor? What happens in other constituencies? I don't know. Uh,
Well, I saw a thing about the auto workers.
I've
Basically,
been surprised.
the Canadian auto workers were complaining that the UAW was supporting the tariffs
Yeah,
and stuff like that.
I, I was shocked by that. Um, Sean Fain appears, I don't know him, right? He appears to be, or he appeared to be, and hopefully he still is, a sincere, militant, and knowledgeable person committed to fighting. Um, and this was before Trump won, right? This was back. Me and another guy were trying to get it to be the case that he would be in the running for vice presidential candidate in the Democrats, which I think would have been quite amazing if it had happened, but it didn't. But in any event, I was shocked by that. I almost didn't believe it, that they had come out for the tariffs. I don't know what's happening. I don't know why he's not highly visible. Um, giving speeches and Musk is firing tens of thousands of workers. Why isn't Sean Fain saying, "Cut it out, no more of that, here we come," and bringing the UAW to defend them? Imagine that happened. Um, that would put a whole different complexion on what's going on now. But it didn't happen. I don't know why. Uh, and I'm sure plenty of them would relate. Plenty of workers would relate. And right now, I think that there are a considerable number of Trump voters who would relate. They're beginning to see. Uh-oh. This is for real. Um, I don't know.
I mean,
Um,
the from the standpoint of U.S. capitalism,
yeah,
the stuff with Canada and Mexico doesn't make sense. I mean, there's elements that make sense. I think
yeah.
some nationalist kind of tariff policy, I think is coherent, but the way this has all been playing out and the scope of the tariffs and that doesn't make sense from standpoint of
No,
U.S. capitalism.
it's hard to understand. I actually find the Mideast policy hard to understand at some level. It's all of it. Maybe we just don't understand. Maybe it is irrational. I don't know. I haven't felt this way in my 70 gazillion years. Uh, and I wish Noam was around to ask, but he's not. And I don't know that he would know either. I think he would just sort of say, I knew he was bad. I knew this was serious. But if you're asking me to explain each of these steps, I can't. Uh, uh, I don't
So
know.
what's the unlikely, but what's the counter? Is there a 5 year flip in the other direction towards a radical left? Is that
I don't know. It
possible?
depends. Yeah.
It would be more possible today than it would have been, 3 months ago, 4 months ago. I would suggest that.
Yes. One scenario is okay. The Democrats win in whatever it is, 2 years, and then they win in 4 years, and then we're back where we started. So that's one scenario. Another scenario is that Trump and MAGA succeed, and we face a long, dark winter of authoritarian, perhaps flat out fascist government. Um, and they're not hiding it. That's another thing that's new, right? They don't hide it. They say what they're going to do, and then they do it, and they celebrate it, and we don't believe it. I mean, it's so far out that it's not quite registering that they're really doing all this. When the first Trump experience, he realized he couldn't do it alone. Um, and the so-called deep state, meaning the entire bureaucracy, was too much to overcome from his little desk in the Oval Office. So they had to do something. So they did. They put together Project 2025. They figured out what they wanted to do, and they are currently deconstructing the entire U.S. government and replacing it. Now, some of the stuff that they're replacing it with is RFK Jr. a sensible choice for healthcare, even if you're a fascist? No, it's just lunacy. Um, I don't know. Uh, he either is crazy and stupid and the luckiest person on the planet in terms of getting his way, or he knows what he's doing. And I suspect, unlike most of my friends, that he knows what he's doing. And we just don't get it. Um, uh, I don't know. I mean, I thought from the beginning that he was all right. Let's have a bunch of sort of Saul Alinsky on the right. Let's have a bunch of little victories. Each time we have a little victory, we'll get a little stronger, and we'll go for another victory. And the other guys are so stupid that we can cow them into submission. They're so passive, they're so civil, they're so whatever, right? We can cow them into submission, and that's the path they're on. They did it much faster than I thought they would. This shock and awe stuff. Uh, it's still working, but it's got serious cracks too, I think. And you're right; it is provoking the left. So even in the mainstream, the main sort of Sanders-like social democratic opposition in social media, podcasts, video casts, some of these guys are getting very aggressive. They are knowledgeable, and one of them now is trying to organize. He's taking a lesson from the right. He's saying, "Look, we can't win. We can't change things unless we have media. So I'm going to organize media." This guy, and I don't know the details. He went to the government, the Congress, and he brought like 100 media people, and a lot of them young, and trying to develop with a plan for um, having really progressive media. It was surprising when I heard about it. It was a little like the right, who decided all we have to do is move 10% of the electorate. Let's aim for 10% of the electorate. This is 4 years ago, 8 years ago. And they got like 13 or something, and they won. and now they're, you know, rebuilding the government. It's not about policies anymore in the U.S. I mean, the policies are there. You have to respond to them. They're important. They're life threatening, but it's really about the structure of the government. You know, they're reconstructing basic institutions. Uh, that hasn't hit Canada yet, but who knows? uh,
Yeah, well, I think interestingly, there is a little bit of an insulation from that. Historically, the pattern would follow, but the sort of the nationalist rejection of Trump has actually kind of was very clearly isolated Pierre Poilievre, who is a sort of quiet MAGA guy, who's the leader of the Conservative Party. He's been boxed in on a lot of his sort of right wing kind of echoing of Trump. So I don't know how that's going to play out in Canada. Obviously, if the U.S. goes down a long authoritarian Trumpian kind of direction, that will, of course, have fairly substantial impacts in Canada. But
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, we've crossed the hour mark. Is there something I haven't brought up that you'd like to bring up at the end? Something that you feel like maybe we should have talked about but didn't?
No.
Nope, you're okay. All right. Thank you very much for doing this. Maybe if our two countries aren't at war, we can we can talk again in a few months. I mean, you know, who knows? Uh, and otherwise, that said, this is Mike Albert signing off until next time for Revolution Z.